الله أكبر الله أكبر
الله أكبر الله أكبر.
أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله.
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 أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله.
أشهد أن محمدا رسول
أشهد أن محمدا رسول
الله.
الله.
أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله.
حي على الصلاة. حي على الصلاة. حي على الفلاح. حي على الفلاح. الله أكبر الله أكبر. لا إله إلا الله.
حقا لا إله إلا الله رب هذه الدعوة التامة والصلاة القائمة آت محمد رسول الله. الحمد لله نحمده ونستعين به ونستغفره ونتوب إليه، وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله، وأشهد أن محمدًا عبده ورسوله، أرسله بالهدى ودين الحق ليظهره على الدين كله ولو كره المشركون. عباد الله، أوصيكم وإياي بتقوى الله، أوصيكم وإياي بتقوى الله، أوصيكم وإياي بتقوى الله. واذكروا نعمة الله عليكم إذ كنتم أعداء فألف بين قلوبكم فأصبحتم بنعمته إخوانا، وكنتم على شفا حفرة من النار فأنقذكم منها. الحمد لله على نعمة الإسلام، الحمد لله على نعمة الإيمان، الحمد لله على نعمه كلها ظاهرها وباطنها. الحمد لله على يوم الجمعة، يوم يتلاقى فيه المسلمون ويتلاقى فيه المؤمنون. أما بعد، Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran used the term of dhulm and its derivatives almost 289 times. 289 times Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran mentions the term dhulm in a way to warn us and to get us to turn away from committing any type of dhulm, oppression. And the dhulm, the term itself, has very many layered, deep meanings. But at its essence, it is to place something in its wrong place. It is also in reference to darkness. Right? It's related to the same meaning. It is an encompassing term relative to not adhering to what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala have commanded for us, which is the opposite, to establish justice. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has counseled against oppression, that He also prohibited oppression on Himself, and there is no limits to Allah's power, dominion, abilities and so on, but He actually prohibited dhulm on Himself and counseled on us not to engage in oppression. Now today I wanted to actually relate this to the oppression that has befallen our black brothers and sisters in this country, and specifically on the occasion today on the assassination of our dear brother Malcolm X Al-Hajj Abdul Malik Shabazz, February 21st, 1965. Now, we often, when we think about Islamic history, we only think of Islamic history overseas. And we think about the history of Muslims relative to early Islam, maybe as Islam moved to North Africa, maybe as it went to the Indian subcontinent, but we're not really connected to history of Islam in this country, and also the long transformation that takes place. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in my view, have given to us a miraculous development in this country. Now, Sylviana Diouf, in her book, Servants of Allah, African Muslims Enslaved in the Americas, and also Ellen Austin, African Slaves in Antebellum America, together they say between 15% to upward of 25% of the enslaved people that were brought to North America in particular were of Muslim background. Among them, people who were memorizers of the Quran. Among them, individuals that were at the rank of a judge in terms of training. Some of them were actually prince and princess. Some of them were leaders of armies. So it's undisputed the fact that there were 15 to 25% of the enslaved people that were brought to North America are of Muslim background. Now, Alan Austin in himself, in his book, collected the handwriting of enslaved people in North America. He did all his work in the New York Public Library. He's a historian. And he actually, the only surviving manuscripts in the handwriting of enslaved people are writing of Arabic, Quranic text, and Maliki fiqh text. So literally the only surviving manuscripts in the handwriting of enslaved people is Quranic text and text of Maliki jurisprudence. Undisputed. Again, you could see some of the work of Alan Austin in his book, and also the Library of Congress have some of these manuscripts. Also, we have undisputed evidence that Muslims actually lived as Muslims during the enslaved period. Salih Bilali, a Muslim who was an imam of the community in Sao Paulo Island, Georgia, where he actually led a group of men that participated in the War of Independence as Muslims, and his daughters were all educated, speaking many languages, and he actually was leading his community as an imam at the time. When he was buried with his Quran, with his tasbih, with his head cap as a Muslim. So Salih Bilali, Sao Paulo Island in Georgia. Now we'll get to Malcolm X, because Malcolm X's story literally demonstrates the arc of both Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala miraculous intervention in this place and in this continent, and the transformations that occurs. By the time we get into the early 20th century, there was no traces of Islam left other than people remembering that my grandmother used to say a few words and used to prostrate. That's what people in the early part of the 20th century, that was what was present. So Islam gets reborn in this part of the world after a whole systematic erasure. So in early part of the 20th century, people begin to be reacquainted with Islam. Part of it post-Civil War, period of Reconstruction, as people were freed as enslaved people, the society did not accept them. So people were searching, and part of the search was looking at what religious tradition is in Africa. Now, we need to also rethink our view of the nation of Islam. Often when you talk to non-African American, non-black community in relations to the nation of Islam, they evaluate it from what you call theology, and begin to say to the nation of Islam, evaluated it from a theological perspective rather than from a socio-historical perspective. The nation of Islam was born at a particular period of time in the history of this country as a reaction to racism and flipping the racial paradigm upside down. The racists said the black person is the curse of God because of darker color and the curse of Ham. Nation of Islam just twisted and flipped the racial paradigm upside down, said we are godlike and the white man is the devil. It's a wrong, but they were born under that construct. So reacting, trying to reconstitute, to understand their place in a highly racialized society. Now that entry into Islam made it possible for large number of black community to enter into the door of Islam from, you say, wrong theology, but ended up in 1976 to move large number of people into what we call Sunni Orthodox Islam. The door was the nation of Islam. Social, right? Anthropological, sociological, political change that results in a major transformation in 1976. 1976, yes, when Warith Din Muhammad dies and Warith makes this transition. Now, Malcolm X himself, he was born in the period of the highest period of lynchings in this country. Between 1876, the end of the Civil War, and 1950, approximately 4,000 lynchings took place in this country. On average, 2 black brothers and sisters were being lynched in this country, and no one was actually taken into account. Every week, 2 being lynched. Lynching is not only a white attempt to strike at the black community. It was literally to tell the blacks during the period of freedom that you need to know your place in the society. You can't access economic rights, you can't access political rights, and you can't access land rights across many parts. So this is what we call Jim Crow. So Malcolm X lived and was born during that period, as well as his family. Let me critique something for us as immigrants. When we say, look at us, we arrived in here 2 weeks ago to Google, and we're so successful. Why not the black community is successful like us? That just like literally is like compounded ignorance. One, ignorance of the history of this country, the history of black community in this country, and the ignorance of your social configuration. When you come to get a job at Google, you're coming at the top level of economic class. Most likely you have people that are with you. You have your cultural heritage being intact. You have everything in there, and you come with some pocket money in your pocket. You have a passport. You have a black community in here for 300 years had nothing whatsoever being given to them except death, destruction, erosion, constant demonization, even up to the present. You should not even engage in attempting to make that comparison. If anything, say, A'udhu billahi minash shaitan rajim, for actually making this, because this becomes part of our internalized racism, both of our own self and how we look at the black community in this country. So Malcolm X for me is the miracle that actually of this transformation. Malcolm X, right? He's born Malcolm Little. His father, is all indication, was killed by the Klan. Right? They said no, he committed suicide. A person with the Marcus Garvey background, with his mother also being both on the Marcus Garvey understanding, committing suicide by throwing himself in front of the train, you have to be completely insane to make that argument. Right? 4 out of the 5 uncles of Malcolm were killed and died by violence. Only 1 died of natural causes. That's the narrative. Okay, for me as a Palestinian, I have to always make that awareness, because you can't only say free Palestine without understanding what's taking place in here. I hope that many people celebrated this past Wednesday. If you didn't, you should. Leonard Peltier, the Native American leader, was released after 50 years in jail. You can't look at the Palestinians being released in the prison in the West Bank without celebrating Leonard Peltier. If you don't know Leonard Peltier, then you don't know political discourse in this country. You don't. All right? So that's part of the understanding. And Malcolm X goes to an all integrated school. He was the leader, he was the head of the class, the smartest kid, president of his class. He tells his teacher, I want to be a lawyer. His teacher tells him, what? You should go be a carpenter. This is what's called crushing the horizons of people, which people do on a daily basis. The worst thing a teacher can do is seize a student aspiring from something and crushing that aspiration. That takes place to our black brothers and sisters on a daily basis. Malcolm X literally ended up in jail. In jail, he was called Satan. That was the name that was given, because literally for him, that was the lowest moment, but he actually gets to be introduced to Islam through his sister and brother, Nation of Islam. And what clicked in his mind, and again, this is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala works in miraculous ways, what clicked in his mind is Nation of Islam said the white man is the devil. He began to think about all those moments in history that his aspiration, his family, right, his mother sent to a mental hospital, the social welfare taking all his brothers and separate them. For him, he made the rationalization. It must be so. And begins to be, again, a person in the depth of prison, right, take on and become one of the most eloquent individuals that, if you study rhetoric, if you study speech making, if you study eloquence, and if you study charisma, Malcolm X is what you call one of the individuals he studied. Martin Luther King another, JFK is a third. His speeches are studied just in terms of his ability to capture people's imagination. And he took on knowledge, he was smart before he went to jail. But because he was crushed, he was completely eliminated from the person that he became. From the depth of jail, he walked with kings, and the kings and presidents became looking inferior next to him. That's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala making miracles. Right? 1/3 of the Muslim community in this country is our black brothers and sisters. And that is directly connected to this transformation that takes place. Right? So change is possible. Malcolm X shows us the trajectory that an individual of his capacity, but also shows us the transformation that occurs in this country. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, I believe that some of those who were brought in the hulls of ships, that brought as enslaved people, were doing dua for their progeny, and we're seeing some of their progeny returning to Islam. That's Allah. Allah answers the dua, answers the dua of the salihin, answers the dua of those people that were taken from their mothers, daughters, sisters, brothers, cousins, so on in Africa, put on the ships. Between 12 to 30 million were taken from West Africa. It was guns for enslaved people. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, through the dua, right, of the Sahih, again, think about it. Prince Abdul Rahman, right? He was a prince, very well educated. His father sent him as to head an army. He was captured, taken here into this country. Was a slave for 40 years, then was freed during the Jackson's presidency, and made his way back to Africa, died in Africa as a free man. That's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala showing miracles in this country. So we need to understand this history in relation to Malcolm X. Now, Malcolm X was assassinated on the 21st of February 1965. Now, we have evidence now of a New York police officer that died in 2011 who wrote a letter. He says, I was a black New York City undercover police officer between May 1964 through May 1971. I participated in actions that in hindsight were deplorable and detrimental to my own black people. Under the direction of my handlers, I was told to encourage leaders and members of the civil rights to commit fallacious acts. He was present in the Audubon when Malcolm X was assassinated. Malcolm X's family have filed a lawsuit against the FBI, the CIA, the New York Police Department. So family members of Malcolm X have revealed in a letter written by the New York Police Department officer Raymond Wood, stated that Wood had been compelled by his supervisor at the New York Police Department to coax two members of Malcolm X's security team into committing crimes, leading to their arrest just a few days before the assassination. Malcolm X was meticulous about security and leadership. So by removing his private security, then the assassin were able to gain access for Malcolm X to be assassinated. Now we know the FBI knew exactly about Malcolm X. They sent a whole team to try to trace him all the way through Africa. He participated in the Organization of African Unity. You tell me the FBI, who had wiretapped Malcolm X, wiretapped Martin Luther King, wiretapped every civil rights leader, didn't know that an assassination is about to take place and killing Malcolm X? The police report showed that those who were in the day before, as they were running the training, said, we just witnessed a dry run on Malcolm X's life. That's our brother that was assassinated in this country. So we need to actually, as we think politically, in terms of our political program, you have to have Malcolm X at the center of your consciousness. At the center of your consciousness, because his contribution politically is still shapes the understanding of our presence in this country. You talk about the debate about Republicans and Democrats. Malcolm X already have talked about this in the 1960s. We need to read it, not to say that it's not it's divine words, but at least he had an understanding that it still contributes to our awareness and consciousness today. So just like Leonard Peltier was released, we need to be involved in this case. We need to be supportive of this case. We need to actually have the evidence, because there is no such thing as a crime that the end time will be close to it. This is a major crime that literally assassinated every main leader of the civil rights movement, Malcolm X and Martin Luther King. And that's our part. For me, it's part of our responsibility as we speak here domestically, as we engage transnationally. أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله لي ولكم فاستغفروه. الحمد لله نحمده ونستعين به ونستغفره ونتوب إليه وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أرسله بالهدى ودين الحق ليظهره على الدين كله ولو كره المشركون. So the family is having a lawsuit against the CIA, FBI, the New York Police Department, and others for $100 million, right? And I think they should actually raise it up to $1 billion, considering what consequence. Just to think, every leader in the civil rights movement from the 1960s either was killed, railroaded to jail, or chased out of this country into exile. And therefore, when we get to the 1970s, by emptying the leadership of a society, then you actually leave them almost open for every element or every type of policy that you send. And if you go to Oakland with the Black Panther Party, they'll show you with evidence how the FBI And also the government pushed drugs into the community as a way to create separation and literally collapse the social fabric that was at the basis of the Black Power movement in Oakland. Just up the street, you don't need to go far. And there are still some of the people who are survivors of the 1960s that tell you exactly how drugs was flooding into the streets. It's not all of a sudden drugs, all of a sudden somebody says, oh, it'll be good for me to get a job as a drug dealer. Right? This was a strategy. This was a plan in order to create division and to corrupt the social fabric of the community. And now we're still dealing with these consequences today. Walmart had far more to do today with the opioid that's on the street and fentanyl than any of us. But the picture that is drawn is actually focusing on the low end rather than on those who continue to benefit from this. So I know that it's a big topic, but I wanted for us to have this understanding as we commemorate the assassination of our dear brother Malcolm X. We think of him as a shaheed, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless him, bless his family, continue to bring many people. One of the primary texts that people read that bring them to Islam is the Malcolm X biography. Many people in jail, many people across, they read his biography, and that is the door for them to Islam. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala works in miraculous way. And I do believe that what we're witnessing in Malcolm as well as in the black community, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala yumhil wa la yuhmil. Yumhil wa la yuhmil. He gives respite but does not ignore. And I think this is what we are witnessing in this present day, inshallah. I want to finish today with asking you two things. One, we have the annual Islamophobia Studies Center fundraising dinner. We do one fundraising dinner a year in order to support the work of the Islamophobia Studies Center. Right? I'm more than happy to be in the front line taking all the incoming, but we need your support in order to finance the research, the publications, all what takes place. So it's this Saturday at Chandi Restaurant. If you are able to make it, by all means. If you are unable to make it, please stop at our table and find ways to support the center's work. And literally, this is taken on the Islamophobia both in this country and transnationally. Second, the brothers also asked me to make sure that you support the MCA 3.0. Institutional building is paramount. Communities are preserved and transmitted through institutions. So it's very important that we continue to invest this way. أقول قولي هذا واستغفر الله لي ولكم فاستغفروه إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آل سيدنا محمد كما صليت على سيدنا إبراهيم وعلى آل سيدنا إبراهيم في العالمين إنك حميد مجيد اللهم إني داع فأمنوا اللهم اهدنا فيمن هديت وعافنا فيمن عافيت وتولنا فيمن توليت وبارك لنا فيما أعطيت وقنا واصرف عنا بالخير شر ما قضيت فإنك تقضي بالخير ولا يقضى عليك وإنه لا يذل من واليت تباركت ربنا وتعاليت ربنا ردنا الإسلام ردا جميلا ربنا ردنا الإسلام ردا جميلا ربنا ردنا الإسلام ردا جميلا اللهم يا مقلب القلوب ثبت قلوبنا على طاعتك اللهم أرنا الحق حقا وارزقنا اتباعه وأرنا الباطل باطلا وارزقنا اجتنابه يا رب العالمين اللهم ارحم المسلمين والمسلمات الأحياء منهم والأموات يا رب العالمين اللهم ارحم مرضى المسلمين جميعا يا رب العالمين اللهم إنا مغلوبون فانصرنا اللهم إنا مغلوبون فانصرنا اللهم إنا مغلوبون فانصرنا اللهم خفف عن إخواننا وانصرهم في فلسطين يا رب العالمين وفي كل مكان وآخر دعوانا الحمد لله رب العالمين وأقم الصلاة إن الصلاة تنهى عن الفحشاء والمنكر والبغي يعظكم لعلكم تذكرون
الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله